I spent $43 on LinkedIn Premium, which is something that I do sometimes. The reason that I only do it sometimes is I don't know whether I'm going to actually get a job through LinkedIn, but I do know, pardon, but I do know I can communicate with my peers through LinkedIn. I can also describe that I'm working on things and make moments more I don't know how to say that. Like while the moment is here, I can work on projects that would benefit from those channels of communication. Cheers. I went to college and eventually dropped out because I wanted to focus more on school later. Returning to school was always part of my plan. More, the option to return to school was always a necessity for the kind of world that I wanted to build and exist in. What I realized was I was focused too much on working, establishing a social ecology, and trying to learn through school, while I was also focused on getting a student organization started. It isn't ultimately bad to have multiple things to consider, though I did want to focus on what I was studying because it felt relevant for the kind of projects I could see myself working on. The culture that I grew up in placed a heavy emphasis on college, and when I dropped out, it seemed like I was rejecting that culture. At least that's how I can figure, that's what I can make from the fallout of me dropping out. There are a lot of systems in the world, and ideally, we would place more of an emphasis on learning than we do on degrees, although the reasons why flow happens between spaces, I guess there's a question, there's open wonder about what's going to make that more likely. Cheers. In college, I took a course called The Culture of Disability, and it introduced me to the idea that there was more to disability than I had thought of before. Learning more about the history of disability, why different policies have become necessary or have been necessary to implement, like why advocacy has been necessary to begin with, and having conversations with people about what they notice and what they value has been eye opening. My belief is that while we have the ability to, we should make the world easier to live in. I also believe that we often have the ability to, and it makes sense to make the ability to easier to discover. Accessibility is multifaceted, and we won't be able to produce a universally accessible portion. Morsel of media, I'm not sure what medium. Every medium is going to have accessibility constraints. We can produce across media and consider the guidelines that other organizations have laid out before. If you're a web developer, read up on web content accessibility guidelines. Cheers. If you have a domain name, you can connect it to Google Workspace for email, and there are a few other options for email as well. Google Workspace is pretty easy to get connected though. You can also connect your domain to Blue Sky, like you can sign up for a Blue Sky account and then later change your handle to be your domain name. If you have a domain name, you can redirect it to point to pretty much whatever. There are some things to mind about search engine optimization and how search engines will treat your domain depending on what you do with redirects. This is where landing pages become more relevant because you can set one of your pages or the home page to be a landing page, meaning that's one of the pages that you send people to. Then, when people land on your site, they can look around and see what they want to do. This is a pretty good place to put call to action buttons, and this might be linking to your Discord server or having a modal dialogue, having some sort of pop up for a newsletter. There are a lot of options with the web, and I'm going to be demonstrating how I approach web development as a web designer. My goals are to also communicate to people who I might hire for an agency and also communicate to my team. So I have different goals than you might, although my incentives are aligned to make web development easier for you. Cheers. Professionally, I've been a software engineer, and something that I've needed to come to terms with is that a lot of my experiences are just too boring to describe. Sometimes the summaries are more interesting, and other times the summaries are passable. You can be experienced as an engineer, but if no one will listen to what you have to say, you aren't going to secure buy in. If no one has bought into your ideas, then they won't care about them enough to defend them. As software engineers, it's necessary for us to practice making our experiences interesting enough to listen to. Cheers. I'm a software engineer and I talk about that pretty often on TikTok. So I've met other software engineers because that's the subject of my videos and the shape of conversations flows around that pretty easily. Through TikTok, I've met other engineers, and one of them has recently launched a project that someone associated with a meme coin. This is new to me, and I don't want to describe too much of what I don't know about, but it's been interesting because, in some ways, the hype around the meme coin is just number go up. And in other ways, for some portions of the audience, it represents a way to describe interest in this developing project. So I think that it's interesting from a marketing perspective because it's self selection. People can choose to buy or sell a coin, and the benefits of existing in that ecosystem come from however they engage. However, we engage, because I'm supporting this project as well. Though ideally, decentralized economies would be stable in, well, I'm not sure exactly. I'm kind of curious what ecology means in these contexts. Cheers. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science, and I also mention that often because it's important to me. Professionally, I've been a software engineer, so my degree path, I didn't actually get a degree. So, two things there. My degree path doesn't matter as much for software engineering because the skills that I have are more relevant. But my major in college, in this case, was particularly helpful because learning how to learn is relevant for software engineers.